Welcome to Victims and Villains, a podcast extension of the nonprofit that educates and engages individuals on mental health awareness and suicide prevention through pop culture. My name is Captain Nostalgia. I have the privilege of being one of the writers and podcasters here on staff, and I am joined by fellow staff writer and podcaster, Mr. Alan Cram, because we're busting down ghosts on this episode. We're talking about Ghostbusters-Afterlife.
We ain't afraid of no ghosts.
I was truly surprised that that song does not come up earlier than the credits.
I'm kind of glad it doesn't, because I just watched Ghostbusters 2 on You Have to Watch This podcast, and I never realized that 5 minutes into that film you have Dan Aykroyd and Ernie Hudson dancing to the Ghostbusters song. Which was just kind of really, really cringe for me on that watch through. Which you can watch now on our YouTube channel.
Yeah. So you guys will have links in the descriptions below. So I have never actually seen Ghostbusters 2. I talked about this in our spoiler-free episode video we did, which is also up on our YouTube. Now, I am not the biggest Ghostbusters fan. Like, the first one was okay for me. I definitely understand the appeal of this fandom. Like, the fandom for Ghostbusters is almost on par with Star Wars. It's strange because it's now become a charitable fan group where you have people that dress up head to toe, go to conventions, go to hospitals, and they're full on all about the Ghostbusters life. And kudos to them. I'm so glad that there is an audience for that. I am just not it.
Yeah, I think a lot of that has to do with what the Ghostbusters are about, and getting rid of things that go creak in the night. And I think for children, I think that's very appealing. And I think that's a lot of what the Ghostbusters groups do is charitable things for kids. But at the same time, it's also if I can dress up as a Ghostbuster with a proton pack and drive the car around, I would absolutely do that. So yeah, I think it definitely has a fan base, and it's definitely become a marketable franchise based off of the films and the cartoon shows, and reboots. I think people have been having a thirst for more Ghostbusters for years, and Sony has really started to really embrace that.
Well, I feel too, there's been this heightened awareness because of nostalgia, and partially because of Stranger Things. I remember when I think it's the second season when they all dressed up as the Ghostbusters. It just kind of seemed like the internet lost their mind when that trailer came out, and now it feels like everything has come full circle. And I'm almost curious if a part of Finn-Wolfhard's contract is Sony was we'll let you use our characters or their likeness, but you have to Finn-Wolfhard has to sign to our sequel.
I have insight on that.
Oh, is that a thing?
That's a thing, yeah. Do we want to get into how I saw Ghostbusters?
Yeah, let's do it, dude.
Afterlife? Okay. So recently I attended New York Comic Con with fellow victims writer Joshua Howell, working the event. And while we were there, we had a program. And in the program for the Ghostbusters-Afterlife panel, the panel was 3.5 hours long. And I said to Josh, I was like, that's awfully long for a panel. I bet that's a screening. So I was like, you mind if I duck out early and go to this panel? He's like, yeah, sure. So I go to this panel, and the panel comes out. The director, Jason Reitman's there. His father and producer of this film and director of the first two Ghostbusters, Ivan Reitman's there. Finn-Wolfhard, McKenna-Grace, Carrie Coon, bunch of the cast is there. They do the panel. And so Finn-Wolfhard talked a bit about not knowing that he was auditioning for a Ghostbusters film, and then asking them me being dressed as a Ghostbuster in Stranger Things going to cause a problem, or is this why you're asking me to do this? Like, what's the connection here? They're like, there is no connection. We just thought you'd be great for this part. He didn't they locked him in a room with the script, not telling him what it was for, except for it's a Jason Reitman film. Like, this is what you're auditioning for. And then found out after he got the part that it was Ghostbusters.
I'm 2 for 2 on film theories this year. My first one came from Candyman, which is it's great. I talked about that in this episode, but yeah. So I don't know. Like, I'm just I don't know. Like, so I wasn't really like, this film like wasn't high on my most anticipated list for this year, but like I knew that I was still gonna see it because like it seems very odd to me that I don't like Ghostbusters, because I'm a horror guy and I like horror adjacent, like spooky things, even if they're like family themed. Like, I love Hocus Pocus, I love Goosebumps, Are You Afraid of the Dark? Like, that was my bread and butter growing up, and like I just feel like Ghostbusters with all of its spookiness is just right up my alley. And
well, so to continue my story, when they went to show the clips of Ghostbusters Afterlife at this panel, Jason Reitman turned to the audience and said, well, my father and I were talking, I think you've waited long enough. And then they showed us the full film. So I did get to see this movie in New York Comic Con a month and a half ago. So I don't have as fresh of a memory of this film as Josh does, who just saw this an hour ago.
True story.
But this film has stuck with me for the last month and a half, though. And I have a lot of thoughts about it, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
I always love podcasts where you have two voices or more voices, where you have opposing views, because I always feel like they make for like the best conversations. And we showed our cards during our YouTube thoughts last week, where Alan just deems this movie a 5 out of 5. I am opposite, where this for me is a 2.5 out of 5. I have many qualms with this movie that I'll get into, but I have many things that I liked about it. This movie felt very much to me like how I viewed Swamp Thing from DC a few years ago, where there's a lot about this that I really liked, a lot about it just about the same that I truly was just like, I don't understand this, why this exists in here. And then we're going to talk about the mental health themes for this. So this is your official spoiler warning right now, getting into this. Dude, yeah. So what's your relationship with the Ghostbusters franchise as a whole?
So growing up, I never owned Ghostbusters, but my neighbors did. There were many times where my neighbors ended up babysitting us, and my neighbors were elderly, and they had a adult-aged, mentally handicapped child that lived with them. So one of her things was she loved watching movies. So she had like the biggest collection of VHS tapes that you've ever seen. And Ghostbusters was just the one that we would always watch. So I watched this film numerous times over there, and then got to watch it more on like basic cable growing up, and then found out about Ghostbusters 2. So I always had an appreciation for the film. And then this was like my introduction to Bill Murray and Dan Aykroyd, who I then saw in like other SNL stuff with. So it gave me an appreciation for the comedy icons that are in it, made me aware of them. I never really got into the real Ghostbusters cartoon. And then when the sequel in 2016 came around, or the reboot came out in 2016, I was really excited for that, with the Ecto Cooler coming back out into shelves. Like, my wife got me really pumped for that. Like, we were hunting for it. I still have some if you want some next time you're in town. But yes. It's just something about that song. Like, Ghostbusters is just always been a part of my life. There was a time last year where my niece was staying at my sister's house and said that she saw something scary at night. Like, she thought she saw a ghost. So being the fun uncle that I am, I picked up the nearest Nerf gun that I could find, put Ray Parker Jr. on my phone. I was like, okay, let's go get this thing. And like ran into the house, and like pretended I was a Ghostbuster for her. It's like, I got it. It's all good. You don't need to worry about it anymore. You're safe. Which I thought was hysterical, but she was like, I don't understand anything that you just did. So
I think again, if you saw this film as a child, I feel like there's a different appreciation. Like, had I seen this movie originally when I was growing up and watching and reading Goosebumps and then watching Are You Afraid of the Dark, I feel like I would have had a finer appreciation for this movie. And the unfortunate truth is that I didn't see this until right before 2016. Like, my wife and I are huge Kate McKinnon fans, and we really like Leslie Jones. And so, like, I was really looking forward to all of the Saturday Night Live influence that was in it. I was really intrigued by Chris Hemsworth being in the movie. And I will say I enjoyed that movie. I think some of the hate that is against it just kind of seems unwarranted.
So, yeah, well, I've got another Comic-Con story that connects to that movie that I can tell you later. But I think the biggest difference between the 2016 Ghostbusters and Ghostbusters Afterlife is the sense of humor that the film uses.
Sure.
The 2016 reboot had a lot of like vomit jokes and was kind of some gross out humor in spots. I think you have a lot of great, strong comedic actresses in that. Like, I love Kate McKinnon. I appreciate Kristen Wiig. She's not my favorite, but I like most of her work. I think all four of them bring something to that film. And even Chris Hemsworth, I think, is great in that. But the sense of humor just doesn't fit what the original Ghostbusters was. But I think that Ghostbusters Afterlife absolutely understood what the sense of humor was with the original Ghostbusters, where it's like, okay, we're in this world of ghosts, but we don't quite understand what's going on. Because that's the big thing with Venkman in the first film, is like he's a Ghostbuster, but he's kind of like meh about it. Like, he's not as into it as Ray and Egon. Like, he's just kind of there for the ride. Where in this one, you have these kids discovering this world of ghosts, and like, this is what happened in New York in the 80s. Like, and like, the sense of humor is very like of the moment. It's not like situational humor. It's more like, well, it is situational, but it's not like gross out jokes. Like, and it does have like the dad jokes and stuff that the kid tells that just makes McKenna-Grace's character Phoebe awkward. And I think that does a great job of just showing her as an outcast, and kind of reflects her grandfather, who's the late Egon, in her. Like, just that those traits were passed along to her, and I think they do a great job of that.
Yeah, I like I was saying, I missed out on this, and I think because I missed out on this at such a young age, at such a formidable age, this just kind of seems like one of those franchises that if you didn't get in on it when you were its target demographic, you really it's really lost on you. Like, I understand that there's a fandom for this. I'm just not it. For whatever reason, I really just, I don't want to say I kind of didn't like this movie, but like, there were things about it that I thought were okay, and then there were things about it that I just kind of thought were eh. But I think a large portion of why I think that way comes from my relationship to this franchise.
Yeah, and with my relationship to the franchise, there are a lot of in jokes with this. There are things in this film that, if you know the first film in particular, that you'll have an appreciation for. And I think what the film does great is, I'm trying to avoid heavy spoilers for anyone who's like, I'm still going to listen until they get into really heavy stuff. What this film does great is it plays with stuff from the first one, but it doesn't feel forced. Everything that they do feels like, okay, like that's believable. We're not just doing this to do this. We're doing this because this is a logical extension of what happened in that first film and the world that they've established. And I think it does a great job of not just going for the member berries. Like, it's like, yeah, here's a ghost trap. Yeah, here's the car. Like, these are the iconic things that you're going to see, but it brings something new to the franchise, like the mini Stay Puft Marshmallow Man.
That is one of my favorite things about this movie. I'll just show my cards for that right now. I 100% agree with you. I think this movie, what it does so well is it orchestrates this legacy, and it really brings this franchise forward. And I think that we're in this market now of cinema going audience where we're doing what I would call like legacy sequels, where it's not quite a reboot, but it's cashing in on that nostalgia, but in a different way than we saw 10 years ago.
Yeah. And just speaking on the legacy sequel part of it, this film is written and directed by Jason Reitman.
Yeah.
Who has been involved, like, he has had Ghostbusters in his life from day one. Like, his dad is Ivan Reitman, who's behind the first two. And at the Comic-Con panel, he spoke to that. Like, this is something that I've been around my whole life. And when it came time, like, he never thought he would do a Ghostbusters film, but then he had the idea of this kid picking up a proton pack and like just shooting it at some cans in a field, and the image of the car driving through a cornfield, and he's like, I don't know who these kids are. And then it dawned on him that they're the Spanglers, like they're Egon's descendants, like they're Egon's family. So like, just having him involved and having him be so passionate about the source material, I think is very, very evident in this film. And I think it's one of its strongest cases for anyone who's skeptical about going to see this. Like, Jason Reitman made this not only as a love letter to the Ghostbusters, but a love letter to his father's legacy. Like, this is the least Jason Reitman film I've seen, and I've seen a few of his stuff, and like you can see his influence there. But this is something completely different. And I would love to see him do more kind of stuff like this in the future.
And we'll talk about it. But I want to officially throw up a spoiler warning and jump into that, because what I want to say, I feel like definitely dives deep into what you were just talking about, the way this film uses legacy, not only behind the scenes, but also in front of the camera. Where I think when you normally think about Ghostbusters, because like, and I this could just be my experience, but that is a mostly like Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd. And we even talked about this in our Patreon episode for Casper last month, where that movie saw Dan Aykroyd pick up the protein, or the what's it called?
Proton pack.
Proton pack. Yeah. See, I'm such a novice when it comes to this franchise. But it to try and basically get out Casper and his brothers. And so I always think that it's always a Dan Aykroyd, Bill Murray. Like, those are the most two you think of when you're talking about Ghostbusters. They are the two most iconic. Ernie Hudson, I feel like, has kind of got the short end of the stick, but he's also in The Crow, so like, he's got a whole nother fandom that he's been able to cultivate with. But Harold-Ramis just always kind of seems like he was in the background, because I mean, Ernie did eventually go on to have a career outside of Ghostbusters, But I mean, maybe you have a different experience, but like I always kind of forget about Ramis until I watched this movie.
Harold Ramis had a bigger career behind the camera than he did in front of it.
Really?
He's behind, like he was one of the writers of the original Ghostbusters. I'm blanking on all of the films that he directed, but he directed Groundhog's Day, which was like a kind of a falling out of him and Bill Murray. But I'm trying to remember what else he worked on. Because I'm pulling up his IMDb just so I can have it right. He directed Year One with Jack Black and Michael Cera. Multiplicity, which is a film that is absolutely fantastic. National Lampoon's Vacation, Caddyshack, Analyze This, Bedazzled with everyone's favorite, the internet's favorite actor, Brendan Fraser. Analyze That, The Ice Harvest, in multiple episodes of The Office. So,
yes. Yeah, I didn't actually know that. That's really interesting to me. That he ended up kind of also having a career behind the camera. So maybe that's why I don't really remember him. But I think that it's such an interest. He's obviously the only Ghostbuster of the original 4 that's not still living. He passed away in 2014. And I think it's interesting that they decided to kind of base the entire legacy of the film on his character.
I think they do a great job of paying tribute to him respectfully. Like I don't think they do anything in this film that exploits his death. I think it's a real love letter to what he brought to the franchise, being a writer and being one of the stars. And I feel like if you made a Ghostbusters 3 and just if they were gonna make a Ghostbusters 3 after his passing, this is the best way they could go about honoring his legacy.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And even we've seen, like I said, we've seen this resurgence more recently where we're seeing posthumously, I think that's how you say it, like celebrities after their death making appearances. We've seen it. We saw it in episode 9 with Princess Leia,
Carrie Fisher, yeah.
Carrie Fisher, and then we've seen it in Peter Cushing in Rogue One. Like it's mostly a Disney thing at this point.
And Fast and the Furious with Paul Walker.
Yeah, true. But I think
that's the biggest one.
I think out of everyone we've seen so far, and also Mandalorian last season too, de-aging. Well, I mean, he's still alive, but de-aging Mark Hamill.
I was going to say, what do you know that I don't?
I think this is the best one I've seen yet, because it feels genuinely like it's coming out of a place of honor. And I'm not going to lie, like there are scenes in the finale of this where his ghost appears and he's like embracing the granddaughter, and you kind of just see him fight alongside the original 4. And I just absolutely was probably one of my favorite moments in this film. And the fact that he doesn't say anything, I think just speaks volumes to how this film just honors him. And the fact there's a transitional scene where it just says for Harold.
Yeah. I forgot about that shot. I'm going to put all the cards on the table. There's a reason this film struck so close to my heart, because I think a lot of what, like, do you want to get into the mental health stuff? Because I feel like we need to get into that now for what I'm about to say.
Absolutely, let's jump into it.
I think a lot of what this film deals with is legacy. Like what happens when a parental or grandparental figure is gone. And I think what struck me the most about this is the way that Carrie Coon's character learns about how her father, who she always thought had abandoned her and didn't care about her life, learns about, like, no, he was keeping track of you this whole time. He just felt that he had this duty that he had to go and make sure that he could protect the world, protect her, and like his grandchildren learning about him more, and like learning about his history. And it all comes to a its boiling point when you see his ghost show up around his granddaughter. And I think what really struck me about that is when I was at New York Comic Con, like I was having thoughts about not going because my grandfather was in the hospital with a whole bunch of things going on at once, and I felt guilty about going. And I was on the phone with him before I left, and like we had a really really short but very emotional conversation, and everything that this film did just brought all of that to the surface. And as soon as I saw his ghost appear around her arms holding the proton pack, I in the middle of a convention, I just started tearing up. Like it was such a sweet moment and such a beautiful moment on the screen, and done so well with the way she looks up at him, and then you see Carrie Coon look at him. Like it was just this moment of love throughout time and space, and it just really struck a chord with me.
If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us.
Now, I absolutely agree. I think that legacy is not only something that exists, as we've been talking about, in front of the camera, behind the camera, even penning the script and the themes that this film deals with, but like you're saying, like it just embodies the weight of legacy. And I feel like when you're talking about the weight of legacy, Carrie Coon's character, who plays Ramis's daughter, she is now she like really never knew him, but like yet it's revealed. Like I think one of the most touching scenes too is that, like, you know, for the first like 2/3 of this movie, he's kind of portrayed as like this like loner that's kind of almost like a deadbeat, but
they call him the dirt farmer.
The dirt farmer. Yeah, but I also think that there's that scene where she goes into the basement and she just kind of sees that like murder board-esque collage of just her, and you kind of just see that like he never stopped loving her. And I think that sometimes when you're going through to listeners that might go through or have experienced um you know upbringings or childhoods where maybe one parent isn't around, or you're bouncing back between divorced parents. There's it's always, you just kind of feel like there's always something within you that like makes you feel, I guess, like a failure. And this is coming from observational, not only of Carrie Coon's character, but also of friends and relatives that I've had growing up that have kind of talked about this and kind of their own mental health journey of, being a child of divorce or like one parent families, is that you never really understand that like love. And I just want to, like, I always feel like love love comes from so many different places that sometimes just because you don't have it at home doesn't mean that you don't have it elsewhere.
Yeah, and I think a lot of why the his ghost appearing is like hit me so hard is there is some drama in my family involving my grandfather that I'm not going to get into on this podcast, but like it just it felt like a warm hug to me, and it felt like Harold-Ramis was reaching out and hugging me in that moment, and it was great to see that moment of like like not even just with the with his family, but he gets a final moment with each of the Ghostbusters then too. And I don't know if you know the history of Ghostbusters 3 and how many times they attempted to make a sequel, but it just never worked out for one reason or another. Like the scripts were never right, so they never got around to do it before Harold-Ramis passed. But like the moments where they each get to say their goodbyes to him was just beautiful. And I think like the biggest thing I can say to take away from that is it's never too late to reach out to somebody who you have love for in your heart, even if you haven't spoken in years or are a stranger, had a big fight. It's never too late to reach out and try to mend bridges. It may not be the easiest thing to do in the world, but I think if you have the opportunity or the desire for those relationships to continue or evolve into something that that you're not happy with, like if you have a relationship that you're not happy with and you think you would be better if it had changed, then I think you can reach out. It's never too late to be like, hey, how are you doing? Like just checking in on anyone like that you love or care for. Like, you can always mend those bridges. I don't think there's many bridges that can just burn completely. I think there's always a way back to something.
Yeah, and I mean, I've gone through so many different relationships where, we've had to have those conversations, and most notably, I think, is for me one of the ones that has been such an impact on my mental health as my relationship with Brandon, who's a fellow writer for Victims, and me and him, I mean, we've known each other for probably close to 12 years at this point, and we were kind of close when we first met, and then we had some disagreements and falling out, and like bridges were burnt, and they stayed just dry for like 4 or 5 years, and then we just randomly started talking one day over gargoyles of all things. Yeah, don't ask me why. I don't even remember.
It's the power of that Next Generation cast. Like that's what it is.
Yeah, you're probably right. Keith David. No one can stay mad at Keith David.
And not even just Keith David. Like Jonathan Frakes brings everyone together. So
this is also true. But like
it's the true Riker maneuver.
Yeah, I mean, we talk literally every day now, multiple times a day, and I was
gonna
just
say I was gonna say you officiated his wedding, right?
yeah, and he's my best friend, and like I can't imagine my life without him now, and those years that like we spent apart, like we both had stuff to work on, and when we came stuff, it was like, let's talk this out, like let's let's understand one another's vantage points and work towards a stronger foundation for friendship. And I've also had family that I've had to do that with. And I mean, yeah, dude, I mean, sometimes it works out. Sometimes you have success stories like Brandon and I, and then sometimes you don't. But it's part of, putting yourself out there and just kind of being at peace with yourself. Like if you've done all that you can do, like don't let failure or the prospect of failure stop you.
Yeah. I don't know what else to say. Like, I think the ending of this film is absolutely beautiful, especially with the tribute to Harold for Harold.
Yeah. I kind of want to jump in and talk about some of my qualms real quick.
Let's get into it, please. I really want to know.
Since you think this movie is a perfect movie. Look, I'm just gonna be honest. A lot of like the teenage cast for this movie doesn't work for me. So like Finn-Wolfhard and like all of the staff at Spinners, like that movie and that entire subplot could have just been out the window, and I would have been fine.
I mean, I see that as the C plot of this film, so I don't really give it much weight when I look at it overall. I think the film comes to a point where he just kind of abandons that whole thing, and the film is better for it. So I agree with you there. That's one of the weaker parts of the film. But I think the film does a good job of steering clear of it once it gets to a certain point.
So we talked about this. Celeste and I did an episode last year for Patreon, which you guys can listen to at the $5 tier, along with Alan's commentaries right now on Spider-Man and the ongoing Legacy series there. But one of the things that I want to address is Finn-Wolfhard. Like, I talked about this last year when I wrote my review on The Turning. The Turning very much felt like fan service for people that find Finn-Wolfhard attractive. And in a way, Ghostbusters kind of seemed to be, at the time of his casting, seemed to be jumping on the fact that like Wolfhard was this, up and coming actor that has a lot of like buzz about him, and it's all because of Stranger Things. He's the breakout star. Like, I get that. That's cool, but he just seems so underutilized in this movie that at one point his character literally just becomes a chauffeur.
I don't really want to say too much about his stunt casting, because I feel like if this film had come out last year when it was supposed to, it wouldn't feel as awkward as it does here. But no, you are right. His character serves the purpose of driving the car, which I think makes sense considering how young Phoebe is in the film. One of the weirdest things about the Comic-Con panel was when McKenna-Grace came out on the stage, she looks 5 years older than she does in the movie. And it's like very confusing. It's like, wait, so she's the one who's in the movie? I was like, oh yeah, they filmed this 2 years ago.
Yeah, I was about to say, I just pulled up IMDb and I was like, this doesn't look like the same exact person. Like, just the headshot that they use for her makes her look like she's like almost like 19, not 12.
Yeah, but I'll tell you this, the kid who played a podcast looked exactly the same.
Dude, podcast and McKenna-Grace's character, Phoebe, literally, I just loved their chemistry and their dynamic. I feel like when you're talking about the legacy of like humor, they embodied the original humor from the 80s. And that's why, like, anytime the camera would pan off to go to Lucky and Finn-Wolfhard's character, or anything that was in the direction of Spinners, it just kind of seemed like, why? Like, I didn't understand it. Like, it just kind of seemed like pointless fan service.
I don't even think of it as a fan service. Like, I think that plot mostly serves the purpose of something weird is going on in those caves, and we're going to show you this, and we're going to get 2 more people involved in this. That way you have the 4 people with proton packs at the end of the film. I think so. I consider the Spinners stuff the C plot, and the McKenna-Grace stuff the A plot. The B plot for me, the one that I find more interesting than the Spinner stuff that really helped me with my 5-star review of this, is the Callie and why is Paul Rudd so far down on the IMDb? Mr. Gruberson. The Carrie Coon and Paul Rudd stuff I thought was absolutely spot on, and did such a great job as the stand-in for the Venkman Dana relationship from the first film, with Paul Rudd kind of playing the, not just Venkman, but also the Rick Moranis character, kind of like a goof, but
that's the thing too about Paul Rudd's character, is that his arc blends so beautifully both into the Carrie Coon subplot and the podcast McKenna-Grace character, where again, here you just have this, like, these things, like, I don't know, like, to me, like, if you plucked out Finn-Wolfhard and Lucky and Spinners, if you plucked them out of this narrative, made this a little bit tighter, I would have appreciated it a little bit more. But also too, like, you could have found another way to explore the ancient what it starts with a G. What's the monster, the big monster in this one? Gozer. Yeah, like you definitely could have had Gozer kind of explained another way, like this giant pit that they essentially have.
I think, like I said, I think his purpose was, like, his storyline was mostly to get the other 2 people in the proton packs at the end. Because it's a Ghostbusters film, you expect 4 people to show up to bust ghosts with proton packs on. Let's talk about the use of Gozer and Zuul in this, because those are 2 names that are synonymous with Ghostbusters.
Yep.
And I think they did such a great job of bringing that story in, bringing those characters back into this in a believable way. Because if you look back at the first Ghostbusters, the whole rooftop of that building was built by that guy who's in the tomb in this town, played by J.K. Simmons. Ever so briefly. I don't know.
Briefly.
I don't know what Sony Pictures has on him, but he's just in everything they have this year. But, like, I think they did a great job of bringing that in and tying it into the mythology of Ghostbusters, and it makes it believable why Egon would spend so much time away from his family. Like, that's the biggest thing for me, is, like, it makes sense why he did what he did, is because he sees it. He knows that this is a apocalypse level threat.
Well, not only that, it also too, it does such a great job at continuing on the legacy. Like this, again, you know, I've never seen Ghostbusters 2, so I don't know, but I do know that within the fandom, it's very much looked down upon, it's frowned upon. But this film feels like, because of the way that it's set up with all the Gozer stuff and Harold-Ramis's character as well, it just kind of feels like a natural continuation of Ghostbuster 84, the way that, you know, the the transition between Halloween 1978 and Halloween 2018 feels like. It ignores everything else that lies in the middle, and it's just like, we're just going to give you a mirror image of what 40 years from this film has done to the characters, and this is what we're going to explore here. That's what I think this film does so well, is that they're like, there were things that happened in 1984, but you also have to understand is that ghosts and demons and goblins, like, they don't just disappear like that. So we're going to explore that and how it's affected the legacy of one particular Ghostbuster, and also to a lesser extent, I would also say Ray Stentz. You kind of get to see the cameo, the initial cameo from Dan Aykroyd that they did in here. You get to explore kind of what happens between the events of the second film into this film.
Yeah, and I think they do a good job of that as well. Like I don't know why, but I think my favorite joke overall of the whole thing is Phoebe gets arrested, and who's she gonna call? Ghostbusters. Like the fact that the first cameo for one of the legacy Ghostbusters is a phone call, and I think that's just super clever. Like I just absolutely love the humor of that.
How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression. And you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today.
Yeah. I think that's absolutely another great point to make. Like, obviously you knew that joke was coming, and kind of goes to the awkward humor I talked about in our spoiler-free video.
Yeah. And I mean, it might not work for somebody who's not as big of a fan of the franchise, but I think as a fan, like, it's just like, that's clever. Like, I can appreciate that a bit more than you, maybe.
No, I'm not going to say that I don't appreciate it or that I can appreciate it. I 100% can and do appreciate it. I'm just saying, for me, like, the humor in this one, I feel like, is also a bit of a lower point, to where it's kind of like trying to appeal both to those that grew up on the original Ghostbusters, which, don't get me wrong, there are definitely times that I found myself laughing. And then it's also trying to appeal to newer audiences like millennials and Gen Z that have very much a different sense of humor than the 84 crowd does. And it seems like they tried to merge and converge those two types, those three types of sense of humor several times, and that joke just didn't land because it didn't necessarily know which audience it was trying to appeal to.
Yeah. And I'm going to say this as well. I'm fully aware that my opinion of this film is probably skewed a little bit higher because of seeing it at New York Comic Con with a room full of people who are eager to see anything Ghostbusters, that they waited in line for hours for a panel, and with the director and cast like 20 feet away from me. But I'm okay with it. Like, I think this, even without that, this film still did a lot of things that I hoped it would do, and it executed its landing perfectly for me. But Yeah, I don't know what else to say. I've got more stories from the panel if you want.
And I think, well, hold on. I think,
Yeah.
I mean, you can feel free to do it. Because I'm more than down to do it. I would like to hear more about the failed attempts to make the third Ghostbusters. Also, I think for this film, because of how legacy heavy it is, it's also for the intended audience of Ghostbusters fans like yourself, and I am just on the outside looking in. There are things that I can appreciate about this film, and there are definitely things that definitely got me emotional during this film, but for different reasons than it got you emotional, or that made you laugh or made you go, oh man, this is so cool. This movie kind of was all right. It's not one of the best films of the year. It's not the worst films of the year. It's just kind of a middle of the road picture.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the things the film does really well at the end is set up the possibility of other films in the franchise that don't have to follow the exact same formula. It really opens up the world to more Ghostbusters adventures, but being able to step away from the legacy of the original four, but still having them be involved with Winston kind of taking over the franchise and rebuilding it, taking over the firehouse again and bringing the Ghostbusters back to life. Like Jason Reitman said at the panel, one of his hopes going forward is that this film will be the starting point for other filmmakers to tell Ghostbusters stories, because you have a generation of filmmakers now who grew up with Ghostbusters and probably have stories that they would love to tell as in this world. And I think there's absolutely the so much potential there for other stories. And here's hoping that it doesn't involve a 21 Jump Street crossover.
Well, I mean, do you want to jump into kind of talking about the two post-credit scenes real quick before we jump into the history? So
to be fair, I don't know the full history of Ghostbusters 3.
Okay.
I just for once, I can send you a video on it and we can put in the chat or in the description. Because I haven't gotten around to it. I've had a busy week, but I know there was multiple attempts to make it. It just never went through.
I mean, that sounds like multiple films in Hollywood. I'm reading a book right now on that very subject. But yeah, so this continuing on the theme of legacy, we get a little bit more of Bill Murray's character with Sigourney Weaver's character coming back for a little playful wink, which I thought was nice. It definitely made his banter during the climax a lot more impactful, I thought. But also equally at the same time, I think that the end with Winston was the more memorable one, because there's now, like you said, now we're in an age of cinematic universes, so you kind of really don't need to just have and rely on the original four, but you can definitely have other people come in and tell stories within this universe.
Yeah. And I'm really excited to see where the franchise goes. Out of curiosity, you saw this opening night. How busy was your theater?
I mean, I saw it the first showing, and theater was not packed at all.
Okay.
And
so I hope it does well this weekend, but I don't know.
It's also you have to take into consideration that it's also still COVID times.
Yeah.
So the box office doesn't play the same, even Shang-Chi and being this latest Marvel film, I don't think grazed a whole heck of a lot of money. I mean, it spent maybe 6 weeks in theaters, and it just ended up on Disney Plus not about a week or two ago. I just saw an article about Venom, just now crossing over $200 million domestically. And so the landscape of films don't look the same that they did 2 years ago.
Yeah. And I'm curious how this does COVID numbers wise. I hope the film does well. I want to see the franchise go forward. I think the fan base is there for it. I think this film was getting some negative reviews early on, but I don't think that they're warranted. Everything that I've seen from people who are fans of the franchise have embraced this film. I haven't seen any of those negative reviews. I just know they're out there. But yeah, I highly recommend this film.
I don't really have a whole lot more to say. I feel like we've talked about this. This film does a legacy really well. It's paced really well. The special effects are really solid. The themes of mental health we've already spoken on.
Yeah.
And yeah.
I got one last question for you.
Sure.
Did you get the new Spider-Man trailer in front of the movie?
Indeed I did.
Okay, nice.
Indeed I did. You better darn well know it, I did.
Oh, when they didn't release it with Eternals, it's like it's going to be in front of Ghostbusters. And then I was off a week when I thought Ghostbusters was coming out. But yeah, that's awesome. I am hoping to go to the theater this weekend to see it, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah. All right. Well, let us know where people can find your podcast.
You Have to Watch This podcast is available on all major podcasting platforms. We are also available on. We go live on Twitch weekly, Tuesday nights usually for our show. You can also find us on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram.
And you guys can follow me. I am at Captain Nostalgia on Letterboxd. And if you guys are a filmmaker, we are taking submissions and sponsorships for our first ever horror film festival. It's horror centric and mental health focused. It is Horrific Hope. We'll provide a link in the description below. But right now, this is a film festival unlike anything else that you guys have ever experienced, with open conversations and dialogue on mental health and mental health resources for all those in attendance. This is going to be April 29th digitally and April 30th at the Alamo Draft House in Winchester, Virginia. All of more you guys can find descriptions below.
It's going to be a good time.
Yes, it will. You guys can find more information on our podcast and nonprofit at victimsandvillains.net, where you guys can find links to more podcasts like this, all of our social media, including Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube, and most importantly, our mental health resource library. So until next time, we wish you guys a happy Thanksgiving, and join us this Saturday for a brand new episode of Abyss Gazing, a horror podcast. Have a good night, guys.